To load the single tilt holder, first remove the plastic end cap. Then using the pin tool, insert into the end of the holder and lift up the clamping mechanism. Using a sharp pair of tweezers, grab your TEM grid by the edge and note which side is the dark shiny side, placing that side down into the basket, making sure it is centered. Once the grid has been placed, lower the clamping mechanism with the pin tool. To remove the grid from the single tilt holder, remove the plastic end cap. Then using the pin tool, insert into the end of the holder and lift up the clamping mechanism. Using a pair of vacuum tweezers, carefully grab the TEM grid by its edge and place it into the grid box. Remove the pin tool from the clamping mechanism and replace the plastic end cap. To load the double tilt hex ring holder, first remove the plastic end cap from the support base. Then use the hex ring tool to remove the hex ring from the basket of the holder. Insert the hexagonally shaped side of the tool into the basket and carefully twist counterclockwise to loosen the ring from the basket. Using a set of vacuum tweezers, carefully remove the anti-twist washer from the basket. With all parts removed from the basket, a grid may now be loaded. If using a grid stored in a gel pack box, use a sharp pair of tweezers to carefully pry the grid off of the gel pack surface and place on a non-sticky surface. Then use a pair of vacuum tweezers to carefully pick up the grid, oriented such that the rounded edge of the grid is facing towards you in the basket. When properly placed, the rounded edge of the grid should be up against the edge of the basket closest to you. Use the vacuum tweezers to pick up the anti-twist washer, noting the orientation of the pair of bumps on the edge of the washer. The washer should be inserted such that the bumps on the washer align with the notches in the basket. Use the hexagonally shaped side of the hex ring tool to pick up the hex ring, making sure the threaded side of the ring is oriented down. Secure the hex ring into the basket by carefully turning clockwise. When finished, replace the hex ring tool into its container and replace the protective plastic cover onto the support base for the holder. To unload the double tilt hex ring holder, remove the plastic protective cap from the support base. Then use the hex ring tool to carefully remove the hex ring by turning counterclockwise. Use the vacuum tweezers to remove the anti-twist washer from the basket. And use the vacuum tweezers to remove the grid from the basket and return it to the gel pack box. Then return the anti-twist washer back to the basket, again making sure it is properly oriented. And then use the hex ring tool to secure the hex ring back into the basket by gently turning clockwise. To load the double tilt clip holder, first remove the plastic end cap from the support base. Then rotate the holder so it is upside down and the small hole on the underside of the basket is exposed. Place a dish underneath the basket. Then using a sharp pair of tweezers or a specially designed pin tool, poke through the hole to release the spacers and the clip into the dish. Then rotate the holder right side up. If loading a grid stored in a gel pack box, first use a sharp pair of tweezers to gently pry the grid off of the sticky surface of the gel pack and place on a non-sticky surface. Then use a pair of vacuum tweezers to pick the grid up, making sure the rounded edge of the grid is facing towards you when loaded into the basket. When properly loaded, the rounded edge of the grid will be up against the edge of the basket closest to you. Use the vacuum tweezers to place the spacers back in the basket on top of the grid. Then use the vacuum tweezers to place the clip on top of the basket. The clip should be oriented so the side with two prongs is facing to the left. Use a sharp pair of tweezers to secure the two prongs on the left side of the clip to the basket. Then use a sharp pair of tweezers to secure the remaining prong on the right side of the basket. Replace the protective cover on the support base when finished. To unload the double tilt clip holder, remove the protective cap from the support base. Then place a dish under the basket. Rotate the holder upside down to expose the small hole on the right side of the basket. Then use a sharp pair of tweezers or a specially designed pin tool to poke through the hole and release the grid, spacers, and clip into the dish. Then rotate the holder right side up. Use the vacuum tweezers to return the grid to the gel pack box. Then use the vacuum tweezers to return the spacers to the basket. Lastly, use the vacuum tweezers to return the clip to the basket. Then use a sharp pair of tweezers to secure the two prongs on the left side of the basket before securing the remaining prong on the right side of the basket. Then replace the protective cover. When loading the single tilt holder, note the presence of the small pin on the holder shaft, as this is used to actuate the valves of the airlock. Note the line at the 5 o'clock position on the airlock, as the pin on the holder shaft must be aligned with this line when the holder is inserted. Push the holder into the airlock until a firm stop is felt, then release your hand from the holder. Notice that the red light on the airlock will turn on, indicating that the airlock is being actively pumped out. While the airlock is being pumped out, make sure that single tilt holder is selected in the microscope control software. Otherwise, the light will stay illuminated even though evacuation of the airlock is complete. Once evacuation is complete, the red light will turn off, indicating that the holder may be fully inserted into the column. Turn the holder approximately 150 degrees counterclockwise until a firm stop is felt, and then guide it into the column. When loading the double tilt holder, note the serial cable used to control the beta tilt axis, and the small pin on the holder shaft used to actuate the valves of the airlock. Line up the pin on the holder shaft with the line at the 5 o'clock position on the airlock, and then insert the holder until a firm stop is felt and the red light on the airlock goes on. Then remove your hand from the holder. You may then attach the serial cable to the connection on the airlock. While the red light is on, the airlock is actively being evacuated. While evacuation proceeds, be sure to select the double tilt holder and then confirm plugging in of the beta tilt control in the microscope control software. Otherwise, the red light will not go off even though evacuation is complete. Once the red light has turned off, turn the holder approximately 150 degrees counterclockwise until a firm stop is felt, and then guide the holder into the column. Once the holder has been loaded into the column isolation valves can be opened. Navigate to the Startup tab in Microscope Control and find the Vacuum Control panel. Select the Column Valves Close button. The button will change color from yellow to gray, and the status will change from Column Valves to Ready, indicating that the column valves are now open. The beam should be immediately evident on the viewing screen when the isolation valves are open, unless something is blocking the beam or it has been displaced from the current field of view. To set eucentric height, first press the eucentric focus button on the right-hand panel. Then use the Z-axis controls also on the right-hand panel to adjust the specimen height until the image goes out of contrast. When navigating to an area of interest, use the magnification knob on the right-hand panel to change the field of view and the intensity knob on the left-hand panel to expand and contract the beam as needed. Use the trackball on the left-hand panel to shift and position the beam, and use the joystick on the right-hand panel to move the stage and center the area of interest on the viewing screen. Once the area of interest has been centered on the viewing screen, use the magnification knob on the right-hand panel to set the microscope into SA mode. As the magnification is changed, use the joystick to recenter and reposition the specimen as needed. Use the trackball and intensity knob on the left-hand panel to recenter and resize the beam as needed. To center the C2 aperture, use the magnification knob on the right-hand panel to set the indicated magnification to 86,000x. Then expand the beam from crossover by turning the intensity knob on the left-hand panel clockwise until the beam is approximately the size of the 4mm circle on the viewing screen. Then use the trackball on the left-hand panel to center the beam on the viewing screen. Turn the intensity knob clockwise to expand the beam. If the beam is no longer centered on the viewing screen, then the C2 aperture is misaligned. To align the C2 aperture, adjust the aperture shifting knobs on the C2 aperture mechanism until the beam is once again centered on the viewing screen. Repeat this process for 1 or 2 more iterations, again expanding the beam from crossover while centered on the viewing screen by turning the intensity knob clockwise, and then using the C2 aperture shifting knobs on the C2 aperture assembly to recenter the beam on the viewing screen. When the C2 aperture is properly centered, the beam should not deviate from the center of the viewing screen when the beam is expanded or contracted. If the shape of the beam is elliptical rather than circular, then the condenser astigmatism needs to be corrected. In microscope control, navigate to the Tune tab, then to the Stigmator control panel and select Condenser. Use the multifunction X knob on the left-hand panel and the multifunction Y knob on the right-hand panel to adjust the shape of the beam until it is circular. When properly corrected, the beam will appear circular as it is expanded and contracted from crossover by adjusting the intensity knob on the left-hand panel. To deactivate the condenser stigmators, navigate back to the Tune tab in Microscope Control, then to the Stigmator control panel and select None. To balance the pivot points, navigate to the Tune tab in Microscope Control, then to the Direct Alignments control panel, and then select Beam Tilt PPX. Use the multifunction knobs on the left and right hand control panels to minimize separation of the beam. When finished, return to the Direct Alignments control panel and select Done. Then select Beam Tilt PPY from the Direct Alignments control panel. Use the multifunction knobs on the left and right hand control panels to minimize separation of the beam. Return to the Direct Alignments control panel and select Done. From crossover, expand the beam by turning the intensity knob clockwise until the beam is slightly larger than the large circle on the viewing screen. Then center the beam by using the trackball on the left-hand panel. To perform rotation centering, navigate to the Tune tab in Microscope Control, then to the Direct Alignments control panel and select Rotation Centering. The strength of the objective lens will begin to oscillate. Use the multifunction knobs on the left and right-hand control panels to minimize shifting of the image as the strength of the objective lens is oscillated. When properly corrected, the image should go in and out of focus but should not shift. When finished, return to the Direct Alignments control panel and select Done. To perform zone axis alignment, select the diffraction button on the right-hand control panel to enter diffraction mode. Then use the alpha and beta tilt controls on the left-hand control panel to tilt the stage to align the sample with the zone axis. Once zone axis alignment has been achieved, select the diffraction button on the right-hand panel to return to image mode. Then use the Z-axis controls on the right-hand panel to minimize image contrast and bring the specimen back to eucentric height. From crossover, expand the beam by turning the intensity knob on the left-hand panel clockwise until it is slightly larger than the large circle on the viewing screen. Then center the beam on the screen using the trackball on the left-hand panel. To align the objective aperture, select the diffraction button on the right-hand panel to enter diffraction mode. Turn the large outer knob on the objective aperture assembly to insert an objective aperture. The objective aperture selected is indicated by the pin position. For high-resolution imaging, select the number 2 objective aperture. Then use the aperture shifting knobs on the objective aperture assembly to center the objective aperture around the direct beam in the diffraction pattern. Note that the position of the objective aperture relative to the viewing screen is not important, but rather the position of the objective aperture relative to the direct beam of the diffraction pattern. Select the diffraction button on the right-hand panel to return to image mode when finished. To prepare the image for acquisition using the CCD camera, use the joystick on the right-hand panel to center the area of interest on the viewing screen. Then expand the beam from crossover by turning the intensity knob on the left-hand panel clockwise until the beam is slightly larger than the large circle on the viewing screen. Then use the trackball on the left-hand panel to center the beam on the viewing screen. To insert the CCD camera, navigate to the Camera tab in Microscope Control. In the CCD TV Camera Control panel, make sure Gatan CCD is selected under Controller and then select Search to insert the CCD camera. Select the R1 button on the right-hand panel to lift up the viewing screen and put the image on the CCD camera. Once the viewing screen has been lifted, the image should be immediately evident in digital micrograph on the right monitor. Left-click on the view window and then use the up arrow on the keyboard to sequentially double the exposure time. While observing the live image in digital micrograph, use the small inner focus knob on the right-hand panel to focus the image. To check for objective lens astigmatism, select the Process pull-down menu, then Live, and then FFT. If any part of the specimen is amorphous, diffuse features will be evident in the live FFT. If objective lens astigmatism is present, the diffuse features will either be elliptical or X-shaped in appearance. To correct objective lens astigmatism, return to Microscope Control, navigate to the Tune tab, then to the Stigmator Control panel and select Objective. Use the multifunction knobs on the left-hand and right-hand panels to adjust the diffuse features in the live FFT until they are circular. Also note that for this to be effective, the magnification must be sufficiently high, generally such that lattice level detail can be observed in the image. When finished correcting the objective lens astigmatism, return to the Stigmator Control panel in Microscope Control and select None. When you are ready to acquire your final image, select Start Acquire in Digital Micrograph. When finished using the CCD camera, select the R1 button on the right-hand panel to lower the viewing screen. Then return to Microscope Control, navigate to the Camera tab, then to the CCD TV Camera Control panel and select Insert to retract the camera. To finish your session, return to Microscope Control, navigate to the Startup tab, then to the Vacuum Control panel and select Column Valves Closed. Retract the objective aperture by turning the large knob with the pin on the objective aperture assembly so the pin is pointing at the out position. Return to Microscope Control, navigate to the Stage tab, then to the Stage Control panel, and expand the panel by selecting the flap out arrow in the upper right-hand corner. Then under Reset, select Holder to initialize the stage. When stage initialization has completed, the X, Y, Z, alpha, and beta coordinates will all read 0, indicating that the holder is ready to be extracted from the column. To To remove the single tilt holder, gently press against the purple plate on the airlock with your left hand. Grab the base of the holder with your right hand and pull straight out until a firm stop is felt. Then rotate approximately 150 degrees clockwise until another firm stop is felt before pulling the holder straight out of the airlock. To retract the double tilt holder, first unplug the beta tilt control from the connection on the airlock. Then use your left hand to gently push against the purple plate on the airlock. Grab the base of the holder with your right hand and pull straight out until a firm stop is felt. Then turn the holder approximately 150 degrees clockwise until another firm stop is felt before pulling it straight out of the airlock.